All set? Okay. Good morning. Welcome. The board has called today's hearing to discuss the service problems that have been occurring across significant portions of the nation's rail network. At the outset, I want to thank everyone, government representatives, carriers, and shippers for appearing on such short notice. We did not want to delay initiating a public discussion on an issue that is clearly impacting so many. I hope this meeting will spur more open dialogue between shippers and railroads in order to reach solutions to service issues. We intend to follow this meeting with more local meetings to further that goal. The board has been closely watching the rail industry's performance metrics, and we are very concerned about the effects of these service issues. Shippers have also contacted the board to express concerns such as slow and unfulfilled orders, car delays, and increased cycle times, particularly on Canadian Pacific and on the northern segment of the Bnsf system. We wrote to Bnsf and CP to express our concerns, and Vice Chairman Begeman and I met individually with senior management from these two railroads. The board's Rail Customer and Public Assistance Program, or RCPA, has been working with shippers and railroads to facilitate resolutions to specific service issues wherever possible. One of their goals is to get shippers and railroads in direct communication about acute service issues, which can sometimes be a hurdle. That process will continue, and we urge shippers and carriers to take advantage of it. I'd also like to point out that a number of the shippers who have contacted RCPA have not given RCPA permission to speak to the railroad on their behalf. That doesn't mean those shippers' concerns aren't being heard. Based on what we've been hearing from shippers and the information we've been getting, it was important to have a public opportunity for shippers to share their perspectives with the board and with railroad representatives. It is equally important for railroads to demonstrate how they are responding to these issues. CP and BNSF should address what they've done already to remedy the service issues, what their plans are going forward, and when they expect to return to normal service. We also have a number of other Class 1 carriers who will discuss what is happening on their networks. I know some shippers couldn't be here today. As the board's hearing notice said, and as I mentioned, we are looking to have follow-up meetings outside of Washington so that we can better understand the issues that shippers are facing. Board staff recently held meetings in North Dakota with dozens of shippers from several states. We anticipate similar meetings in other areas. In addition, written comments may be filed in this docket pursuant to yesterday's decision. We also know that shippers are looking for more information from the railroads about when things are going to get better and what the railroads are doing to make that happen. This hearing is a first step in that effort. As for the railroads, we urge you to work to address service issues within your companies, with your customers, with the board, and with other carriers. Ultimately, carriers are responsible for developing plans that allow them to serve their customers. If board authority, for example, authority for trackage strikes, is necessary to prevent severe shipper impact, such as a plant shutdown, you need to bring that to the board ASAP, and we will act on it ASAP. If our CPA can assist in addressing a shipper issue, you need to use them as a resource. I just want to stress that we'll do whatever we can to help. Before we begin, let me just take a few moments to review a few procedural points about today's hearing. We want to hear today from every party that has filed a notice of intent. To allow that to happen, we will ask parties to stick as closely as possible to the time that has been allotted. We recognize that that is not always going to allow you to say everything you want to, but we want to make sure that there is an opportunity for everyone to speak. You will have a light before you at the front of the room. 1 minute before your allotted time is expired, a yellow light will appear. When you see the red light, your time is expired. Please conclude your thought at that point. If you are scheduled to speak, please make sure that you check in with the clerk at the front of the room. To the carriers, I was asked that you ensure that you have representatives in the room for the entire hearing, even after your testimony, to hear shippers' concerns and possible solutions. I've also been asked to remind speakers to please speak clearly into the microphone. In addition, the public should be aware that a video archive of the entire hearing will be placed on the STB's website within a few days of the close of the hearing. In the likely event that we have a fire alarm or other event requiring evacuation, please proceed in an orderly fashion out of the double doors at the back of the hearing room and out of the building through the front entrance. Specific instructions have been posted at the back of the hearing room for assembly and notification of return, if any, to the hearing room following any evacuation. Also, a note regarding PowerPoint presentations. If you haven't done so within the next 2 days, please provide 2 hard copies of the PowerPoint presentation to the Office of Proceedings. Finally, if you have not done so already, please turn off your cell phones. With that, I will turn it over to Vice Chairman Begeman.
Thank you. I want to begin by thanking the chairman for agreeing to hold this hearing so that we have an opportunity to discuss the really serious rail issues that are affecting a large portion of this country. Not the entire country, but important segments of the country. And I really also want to thank all of the witnesses, the shippers, the carriers. I certainly recognize it's a relatively short notice hearing, and that's because of how we view the importance of this issue. But I understand, I know personally the expense that particularly the shippers have gone to be here, to fly from the Midwest. It's not easy to get here, and you don't have a direct flight, and it costs a lot of money on short notice. So thank you for the effort. As the chairman mentioned, he and I met separately over a month ago with both the presidents of Burlington Northern as well as CP. I had a lot of questions during my very long meetings with them. I still have a lot of questions. I want to hear an update on where they are from where we last met. Certainly I've been following the data that you've provided us. It's not all good news, I will say that, but I hope that what this hearing will do, it will let the shippers and the board really be informed on what our expectations should be. I'm not looking only for good news, I want the truth. And with that, I hold you accountable. I don't want to the railroads. I don't want to micromanage your operations. But that said, we do have emergency service orders authorities, and if we need to use them, that's going to have to be on the table. I don't think we're there yet, but I really look forward to hearing from you, and we will continue this dialogue in the days ahead, I think. But thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Also, I saw yesterday it was 71 in Minot, so hopefully that'll be helpful. I still have that on my weather.com site. So, I wanted to start on a positive note. So, why don't we begin with panel number 1. We have the Administrator of the Federal Railroad Administration here, and Mr. Szabo, why don't you begin?
Well, thank you, Chairman Elliott and Vice Chairman Begeman. On behalf of Transportation Secretary Anthony Fox, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the negative impact service degradation in our nation's rail network can have both on rail safety and Amtrak's on-time performance. Let me talk first about FRA's top priority, which is safety. Over the past decade, our data-based oversight and enforcement program has helped the industry achieve a 47% decrease in both train accidents and derailments and a 35% decrease in highway rail grade crossing accidents. By virtually all measures, fiscal year 2013 was the safest year on record. But the bottom line is we owe it to the public to always do better. And that's why the Railroad's weekly metrics showing railroad performance declines among the Class 1 carriers are a big concern to us. As railroad performance declines, rail velocities diminish, cars on line increase, terminal dwell times increase, and above all, our past experience tells us that safety can suffer as well. We saw this firsthand with the significant service degradation that Union Pacific and Southern Pacific faced about 15 years ago when we testified before this board, and this was an example of how quickly operating conditions can change and affect safety. Experience tells us there can be a safety breakdown when it comes to the ability of supervisors to perform their jobs as a consequence of additional work pressures. Ineffective crew utilization can lead to employee fatigue. And in order to ensure adequate rest, crews need absolute predictability as to when they go to work. And as a railroad pushes to gain the upper hand on service issues, it becomes necessary to hire new employees. And without adequate training that instills the proper safety culture, there's risk that the number of accidents can rise. As large of a role as the nation's freight railroads have in serving our nation's business and economy, no concern can ever come before safety. And so that's why we've been monitoring the situation closely and have begun meeting with the railroad CEOs to gain assurances that carriers are operating in the safest manner. In BNSF's letter to the board in response to the Western Coal Traffic League's request for proceeding concerning rail service problems, the railroad announced that it will be hiring 5,000 employees in 2014 to relieve these service pressures. And while this is laudable, it's imperative that the railroad undertake the proper training to ensure that the railroad operates in the safest manner. We've also noticed a marked increase in delays to Amtrak trains and associated degradation in on-time performance. DOT and FRA provide financial assistance to Amtrak to partially fund its operations and capital investments and work to support Amtrak's efforts to enhance its passenger rail services. For these reasons, Amtrak's financial performance is of great interest to us. And in keeping with our nationwide mandate to improve the safety of passenger and freight railroads, we focus closely on the safety of Amtrak's facilities, equipment, and transportation operations. Now, it should be noted that Amtrak has set ridership records 10 out of the last 11 years, and the last year was relied upon by more than 32 million travelers. So service issues that ultimately delay intercity passenger trains have many negative implications for travelers, for Amtrak, and the transportation network as a whole. Late trains that cause travelers to miss connections or abandon their travel plans entirely, reduced ridership and additional operating delays cause Amtrak immediate and potentially long-term financial harm. A slower, less efficient passenger rail network reduces travel options for some and may put more strain on other modes of transportation. And so DOT and FRA closely monitor the on-time performance of Amtrak services because even just a few months of poor performance have the potential to cascade into long-term problems. Over the past 12 months, we've witnessed a steady decline in timeliness of Amtrak trains, particularly those that operate over the freight rail network. Only about 63% of Amtrak's long-distance trains reached their endpoint on time between March 2013 and February 2014, 12% worse than the previous 12-month period. From December 2013 to February 2014, half of all long-distance trains were late to their final destination. On-time arrivals to intermediate stations on long-distance routes were even less frequent, only at 48% over the last 12 months, and just under 40% this past December through February. Shorter state corridor trains did not fare much better, with nearly a quarter of them arriving late over the past 12 months. Amtrak's on-time performance has been a long-term interest of this department and of Congress, and Amtrak tracks and reports all train delays to FRA. For February 2014, the month for which data was most recently reported, delays attributed to the host freight railroad were the highest in over 5 years. The largest category of Amtrak delays in recent months has been host freight train interference. Such a designation is based on the Amtrak conductor's immediate observable cause, and these extreme delays to Amtrak and other users of the network are a symptom of a fragile network that is strained and struggling to react. So thank you for the opportunity for DOT to comment in this proceeding, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
No questions. Thank you very much. We always appreciate hearing from you. And
I'm dismissed.
You're dismissed.
Thank you.
Take that long commute back.
Yeah. On foot.
And why don't we bring up the second panel? Okay, why don't we begin? We'll go across this way. We'll let you guys provide your testimony, and then subsequently we'll ask questions after everyone's done.
Very good. Good morning, Chairman Elliott and Vice Chairman Begeman. My name is Dave McMillan, Senior Vice President of External Affairs for Elite and Executive Vice President for Minnesota Power. I'm appearing here today on behalf of the Western Coal Traffic League and Minnesota Power. The League is comprised of shippers of coal mined in the western United States. Currently, the League members pay to transport about 140 million tons of coal annually. Elite is a diversified energy company headquartered in Duluth, Minnesota. Our principal operating division is Minnesota Power, generating, transmitting, and distributing electricity across a 26,000 square mile chunk of northern Minnesota to about 144,000 customers, 16 municipalities, and some of the nation's very largest industrial customers. Coal is our primary fuel source, and we currently operate 3 coal-fired power plants that utilize about 5 million tons of coal a year. This coal originates at mines in Wyoming and Montana, transported by Bnsf either in single carrier or joint carrier service. Minnesota Power is a long-term member of the Coal League. I'm joined here today by a second Coal League member, Bob Kahn. Bob is the General Manager of the Texas Municipal Power Agency. Bob's remarks will follow mine. On behalf of the League, Minnesota Power, and Texas Municipal, I want to thank the Board for holding today's timely and important hearing. The League has submitted 2 filings with the Board, one dated March 13th and the second dated March 24th. These filings graphically depict the problems that faced by many coal-fired utilities in recent months due to BNSF's ongoing service issues. These issues include precariously low stockpiles, often dipping below 10 days, emergency trucking of coal, reduced coal-fired generation, and its replacement with higher-priced generation resources, resulting in increased wholesale and retail electric costs. Minnesota Power specifically has experienced all of these problems firsthand. Our stockpiles at 3 of our 3 coal-fired plants dipped to dangerously low levels, and I say dangerously, very intentionally. Our levels dropped to as low as 4 days at our largest power plant earlier this year. We were forced to begin emergency high-cost trucking of coal we had in storage in Superior up the North Shore to our second largest plant at Taconite Harbor. And most importantly, we were forced to curtail generation both last year and earlier this year and replace it with higher priced purchase power, which in turn has led to approximately $10 million in additional electric service costs that our customers have to pay when we go to market for power that we could not generate. These costs have been borne mainly by our large industrial customers. They're customers whose names I think you'll recognize, operating globally and competing in international markets. Names like ArcelorMittal, United States Steel, Cliffs Resources, UPM Kumini, Blandon, Sappi, Gerdau Ameristeel, NewPage, who I note is here today to talk to you as well. Other Traffic League members have experienced similar problems. Bob will discuss TMPA's service problems, and 3 other Traffic League members, Kansas City Power and Light, Wisconsin Public Service, and Western Fuels Association, have asked me to briefly describe their current service problems to the Board. Starting with KCP&L, that utility's BNSF served stations have experienced cycle times in 2014 that are between 27% and 39% longer than comparable times in 2013, with performance worsening steadily from the fall of 2013. Coal inventories at the BNSF served plants have not been at target levels since July of last year and have decreased precariously over the last 7 months. Actual BNSF deliveries during this period have been as much as 22% below nominations. Wisconsin Public Service's Weston Station is served by UP and CN. At the start of the December 13th, coal inventory was at 107% of target levels. By year-end, it had dropped to 72% of target levels. It kept falling in 2014, so that by March, WPS had to reduce burn in order to prevent inventory from reaching zero. Over the same December to March timeframe, tons delivered by UPCN fell short of nominations by more than 375,000 tons, and transit times increased from 176 hours to 372 hours. Lastly, Western Fuel purchases coal transportation for several BNSF-served cooperative utilities. WFA reports that BNSF's current cycle times are up to 50% higher than historic averages. Stockpiles at many plants are extremely depleted. Several of its member companies have had to engage in expensive coal service mitigation measures, including emergency coal trucking and generation curtailment. And unless BNSF service improves soon, even with conservation efforts, some of its members may run out of coal this summer. While the unfortunate and costly results of carrier service failures are well known to utility coal shippers, what is less clear to the Traffic League members is, first, why did these service problems occur? Second, what are the carriers doing to fix them? And most importantly, how long will they last? We will be listening with great interest to hear the carriers' responses to these three basic questions. The League also requests the Board to take 4 immediate steps. First, direct BNSF to publicly submit on a biweekly basis the coal service data we identified in our March 24th filing. Second, direct BNSF to publicly submit a specific service recovery plan along with periodic biweekly progress reports. Third, to closely monitor developments and exercise its broad authority as necessary to issue specific remedial service orders. And fourth, to collect interchange dwell times and yard dwell times in Illinois and Wisconsin for UP and CN, as well as UP coal train cycle times from the PRB to Colorado, from the PRB and Colorado to Chicago. The League may supplement the record with additional requests following today's hearing. Finally, at Minnesota Power, we try and approach problems with creativity and optimism. I want to end my remarks on that spirit, with that spirit. Minnesota Power has had a long relationship with BNSF that dates back to 1968. We were BNSF's first Western coal unit train shipper, and I want you to understand we've had a long and mutually beneficial partnership with BNSF that we certainly expect to continue. In recent years, we've worked closely with BNSF to proactively look for ways to address the infrastructure side of these issues. For instance, we're working together in energy-rich and energy-friendly states like North Dakota to support new investments aimed at reducing congestion with new infrastructure. We're also exploring loop track investments and enhancements at our largest power station. During the recent crisis, we've been in constant communication with BNSF regarding these problems and the impact they have on our operations and our customers. I want the Board to know that BNSF has made its people available to us from the CEO down whenever we have asked. For example, BNSF's Chief Marketing Officer, Steve Bob, who I understand is speaking to you today as well, traveled to Duluth and spent the better part of an entire day with our largest customers helping explain the current situation. So, while BNSF has listened to us and taken steps this year to address problems, we still have a long way to go. Like all successful long-term relationships, sometimes one partner needs to hear frank feedback from the other. Providing that feedback is my primary purpose for being here today. Our customers in northern Minnesota depend on Minnesota Power and BNSF for reliable and affordable electric service. It's up to us and this Board to assure that they get their expectations, or that their expectations are met. I thank the Board for the opportunity to participate. I'm happy to answer any questions or provide additional information. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Elliott and Vice Chairman Begeman. My name is Bob Kahn, and as David said, I'm the General Manager of TMPA. I will say I was stationed up in Minot when I was at Jagan Air Force for 2.5 years, and 71 is nice. TMPA was established in 1975. It's a nonprofit municipal utility that serves the cities of Bryan, Denton, Garland, and Greenville, Texas. TMPA and its member cities serve a little south of 200,000 meters in Texas. We only have one generation assets. That's our baseload coal-fired Gibbons Creek Steam Electric Station located near Iola, Texas. And it has a net generating capacity of 470 megawatts. We also operate transmission facilities into the ERCOT grid, Electric Reliability Council of Texas, that serve our customers. And all the power we generate goes to those 4 cities. We burn approximately 1.57 million tons of Powder River Basin coal a year, and BN delivers all of our coal. We really rely on BN. It has their performance has significant consequences for us. Only a year ago, we had a full coal pile with nearly 60 days inventory at Gibbons Creek. Today, we have less than 10 days on the ground. In any event, their service began its decline in May of 2013. BNSF regularly struggles to provide locomotives, crews, and rail cars in adequate amounts to move our coal needs. On 2 occasions, December 2013 and April 2014, just a few days ago, when inventory levels dropped below 10 days, TMPA filed DOE reports declaring fuel supply emergencies. The notice is filed when the utility believes that fuel supply difficulties could impact electric power system adequacy or reliability. Simply put, our projections show that we're going to run out of coal probably midsummer, mid-July. The harsh reality is that TMPA will be forced to either shut down the plant or significantly curtail its production. In turn, similar to what David said, our members, could be forced to buy much more expensive power on the grid. It's also possible that BNSF service issues could threaten the availability of electricity across ERCOT. There are other coal plants in Texas. As a side note, I am a former CEO of ERCOT, and I'm keenly aware of the consequences of coal-fired electric generating stations having to curtail generation during the summer months in Texas. That would not be good. What is most disconcerting is that no resolution of BNSF's problems seem imminent. In fact, in our experience, they say all the right things but fall short on execution. For example, I was at a coal conference that they put on in the Dallas area last fall. One executive after another got up there and said they were upset with their performance, they'll do better. In fact, it's gotten worse. Their cycle time performance dropped by 15% in 2013. At the end of 2014, we were 84,000 tons short of our total nominations, left us with only 15 days of coal on the ground. And we think it's just going to continue into 2015. We don't see it getting any better. We're also concerned about the planned construction and maintenance activities that BNSF will, with the Tower 55 construction project in Fort Worth. Because of that project, cycle time is going to increase. It's going to force them to take longer routes coming to us and returning. We're also going to have shorter trains, not as many cars. To minimize the impact of the Tower 55 project, in December, on the advice of a BNSF executive, we requested that BNSF increase our first quarter 2014 deliveries to build up our coal pile. We didn't ask for more coal overall. We just asked it to be moved up into the first quarter so we'd be ready for the summer. Despite its own suggestion, BNSF has failed to deliver on TMPA's requests. They delivered approximately 112,000 tons less than our December nomination for January through March and missed the mark by 66,500 tons in March alone. In light of the service problems, our member cities have already spent a lot of money to deploy energy conservation methods which preclude Gibbons Creek from running on an economical basis in order to minimize coal burn and build inventory. But as soon as we enact those coal conservation measures, BNSF basically goes to the person who has a lesser pile than us. And so it really doesn't help us to minimize our coal use. They just run from one problem to another. On the upside, BNSF has communicated well, and in recent weeks it has seemed to focus more on the seriousness of our situation, including delivering a plan to put 4 trains in TMPA, which is really the bare minimum given BNSF's current performance. However, with slower cycle times, which as you know is the key, there's no margin for system interruptions. I mean, just last week we had 4 trains on the way, 2 got stuck in Oklahoma, they couldn't find crews, and it took an extra day or 2 for those 2 trains to get there. TMPA has not just pressed BNSF to improve. We've also asked BNSF to consider other remedial measures. We've requested that they grant permission for us to pursue alternative service with UP and place TMPA leased cars in service, but we have not received a written response yet. Instead, they just reassure us that we won't run out of coal. I'm hopeful but not confident. And I'd just like to conclude by saying we understand the board has considerable power and discretion to aid shippers when severe service issues arise. As David mentioned, WCTL has several specific requests for the board with respect to data collections from BNSF. TMPA also urges the board to consider any other actions it believes will aid all the shippers impacted by BNSF's service crisis. On behalf of TMPA, its member cities, and WCTL, I thank you for allowing us this opportunity to testify today, and Dave and I are happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Elliott, Vice Chairman Begeman, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for this opportunity to testify at this hearing of the Surface Transportation Board. My name is Bob Wisness. I'm a farmer from western North Dakota, a father of 4 grown children, 2 of whom are involved in our family farm, and I am president of the North Dakota Grain Growers Association. I also serve on 2 committees of the National Association of Wheat Growers, where I am chairman of the Environmental and Renewable Resources Committee. I'm honored to represent all of those interests at this STB meeting as we try to better understand the issues surrounding rail service, particularly as they apply to shipping agricultural products in the northern Great Plains. In order to understand where I'm coming from, so to speak, it's important that we learn to appreciate the geography, history, and economics of North Dakota. So here's a condensed view of North Dakota in just a few minutes. You surely know where North Dakota is, but it needs to be emphasized that our location, right in the middle of the North American continent, is central to today's discussion. From my home in rural Watford City in western North Dakota, it is nearly 700 miles to Minneapolis, 700 miles to Denver, and 1,200 miles to Seattle. We have no seaports or navigable rivers, and we have Canada on our northern border. Essentially, we are landlocked geographically and geopolitically. Yes, I'm from Watford City, North Dakota, which is now better known as a Wild West boomtown in the epicenter of the Bakken oil play. It's become a very interesting place to live and farm during the past few years. Also geographically, it's important to realize that North Dakota isn't just about oil. We are a state dominated geographically and economically by agriculture. In fact, less than 20% of our state is in the Bakken oil region. And even in that region, agriculture continues to dominate the landscape. Oil gets the headlines, while agriculture is not only our bread and butter, it is our backbone. It may seem odd, but North Dakota is also landlocked economically in many ways. We rely heavily on the railroad to move our abundance of agricultural goods, coal, and oil to where they can be used by industry and consumers. In spite of our somewhat isolated location, North Dakota is one of the key drivers of the American economy. We lead the nation in the production of 14 crops, and we are the #2 oil-producing state. North Dakota is also a major supplier of coal, electricity, and wind energy. We are America's breadbasket and Saudi Arabia rolled into one great state. Some historical perspective is important to understand why rail service is so important to North Dakota. In many cases, North Dakota was built around the railroad. Indeed, most of the towns that sprang up some 100 years ago were along rail lines, either main lines or the dozens of shorter branch lines. Rail service was critical to move our agricultural goods to market 100 years ago, and it remains that way today. Through the decades, the relationship between railroads and agriculture has had its ups and downs. I've already described the heyday of the rail service in North Dakota, those early years, but they are long gone. Perhaps the biggest down was the railroad's abandonment of many of the branch lines that served the smaller communities of the state. Branch line abandonment was a contributing factor to the depopulation of our small towns, and the smaller farmer operators had no place to locally market their grain. Obviously, the railroad is an incredibly powerful force in North Dakota. That's why I'm here, and that's why these meetings are critical to our farm, our state, and our nation. Nowadays, North Dakota farmers are facing another challenge from the railroad, and it's not caused by a lack of railroad business, but rather an excess of business. Everybody wants to ship their products by rail, and obviously the railroad wants to accommodate as many shippers as possible. I cannot blame the railroad for wanting to maximize their profitability, but their choices are putting thousands of North Dakota's farmers in jeopardy. Here are some of the impacts. Excuse me, I saw a red light.
Yeah, take your time.
How much time did I have? Okay, thank you. I have a lot more to say.
Never mind.
All right. Here are the impacts we're seeing on the farms and ranches in North Dakota. Millions of bushels of wheat, barley, corn, and soybeans are essentially unmarketable and stranded on farms as grain trains are running weeks or even months late. On-farm grain inventories are at all-time highs for this time of year, and the reason is not too much crop to move, it is that the crop is not being moved. We've had big crops before, but we have never had this poor service from the railroads. On my farm, at least 3/4 of my 2013 production is still in the bins. Typically, I have delivered most of my grain by now. Number 2, cash flow problems are plaguing our farmers simply because we cannot turn our crops into cash. I've been forced to borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars to cover my farm expenses while my grain is undeliverable. Number 3, timeliness is very important in agricultural shipping. Our crops do have a shelf life, and that they cannot be stored indefinitely before they're marketed. Significant spoilage and loss does occur when farmers are forced to hold their crops off the market for extended lengths of time. Number 4, crop storage capacity will also be a major issue if the past year's crop is not taken off the farms before the next harvest, which is fast approaching. At the current pace of grain movement, it's likely that up to 1/2 of the next crop will end up piled on the ground, which will be a major disaster. Number 5, all of this grain has to get to market somehow, and the only means left is by truck. The decades-long degradation of rail service has meant that farmers must often purchase fleets of trucks and hire drivers to find a place to market their grain. My local grain elevator is 7 miles from my farm, and when I can deliver there, it saves me many hours and miles on the trucks. Most of the time, however, my local elevator is full, and we're forced to haul much longer distances, up to 150 miles one way, to move our crops and turn them into cash. Trust me, it didn't used to be this way. More than 50% of the wheat grown in North Dakota is exported. It all has to go on the rail, as there is no other choice. Montana's percentage of export is even higher than North Dakota's. If there is not a concerted effort by the railroad to move grain on a much more massive scale and in a timely manner, our reputation as a consistent, reliable exporter of high-quality wheat will be damaged. Losing our critical export markets would be devastating to northern farmers and our state's economies. Number 7, basis rates for northern plains grains are currently extremely high due to the tight rail car situation. This has resulted in depressed prices that farmers receive. Number 8, as of March 29th, 2014, Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway reported that 46% of all cars nationwide, those which were destined for North Dakota locations, were an average of 22.8 days late. Cars with Montana destinations accounted for another 20% of all late arrivals on a nationwide basis. In other words, these two states account for 2/3 of all of the late arrivals nationwide. This is simply unacceptable. In any other business, this would be called a disaster. It should be noted that agriculture is not the only industry suffering from BNSF's poor performance, but it appears to be the most affected. I can attest to the fact that finding a grain elevator with space for grain in or near the Bakken area has been nearly impossible since last fall. For North Dakota farmers, the railroad is a lifeline to reach out to markets both foreign and domestic. Unfortunately, we've been let down by the railroads before, and we're hesitant to accept their promises during these latest challenges. In the past, farmers have done everything the railroad has asked, only to receive poorer service. We need more than promises. We need action. The question is whether agriculture can somehow survive in this new world as the grain trains are forced to fit somewhere on the tracks after the oil, coal, and intermodal shipments pass by. We know there's limited space on the tracks, but we must demand that the grain moves first and not last, before irreparable damage occurs to the farm economy in the northern plains states. That brings us to today. How do we move forward to solve these problems? Excuse me. In spite of many agricultural leaders' criticisms, the truth is that there are no bigger supporters of the railroads than northern plains farmers. We have no other options, and we believe that a strong rail system is critical for us as farmers and for the entire country. Strong rail service is in the national interest. We sincerely hope and trust that the railroads are working to upgrade their systems and that the promises of better service will soon come to pass. We realize that these improvements will take time to implement, but our patience is exhausted. We simply cannot wait several years for the promised improvements, as we have crops that must be delivered now. Let's think ahead a bit and on a larger scale. There are numerous oil shale formations scattered around the United States that will surely be exploited over time. Will that oil also be transported primarily by rail as well? Is that good policy? Will those agricultural regions share the same problems as North Dakota? It's imperative that America's energy independence be allowed to flourish, but we must not sacrifice our agricultural independence. Let's learn from the problems that North Dakota has experienced and not make the same mistakes. As a representative for over 20,000 North Dakota wheat and barley growers, it's my duty to demand that the railroads immediately put more grain trains on the tracks to help alleviate this backlog of farm-stored commodities. Thank you for the opportunity to give our side of the story, and thank you for extending my time.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Elliott, Vice Chairman Begeman. I'm Tom Schick. I'm here to speak on behalf of the American Chemistry Council, and we appreciate this opportunity to be here to talk about rail service issues. The American Chemistry Council represents the leading companies engaged in the business of chemistry. Our members apply the science of chemistry to make innovative products and services that make people's lives better, healthier, and safer. I'd like to underscore the important role that the products manufactured and shipped by the ACC members serve in virtually every aspect of our lives. The nation depends on the chemical industry to produce materials that are necessary for safe drinking water, life-saving medications, medical devices, safe and plentiful food supply, energy saving, solar panels, and much, much more. As you know, our members depend on efficient and reliable rail service. Given the relatively short amount of time since this hearing was announced, I've gathered comments from a number of ACC member companies that could not be here to testify today. My remarks, therefore, reflect the views of a range of companies that ship by rail in our industry. In sharing this information, I will address the carriers in alphabetical order. For BNSF, I have 6 observations from 6 different companies to relate to you this morning. The first company reports our cycle times on BNSF have more than doubled since the first of the year. Most of this is the result of BNSF utilizing more circuitous routings to avoid sending traffic across the northern tier line.
So at least they are making an effort to keep traffic moving, even if it does result in much longer cycle times for our private equipment, that is the rail cars, the shippers' rail cars. By way of example, says the company, we have seen normal outbound loaded transit times go from an average of 10 days to between 20 and 30 days this year, with empty return transit times similar to that for our outbound loaded movements. We have not had to secure additional equipment, but we have had to shift cars between plants because of the longer cycle times. Second member says, we have big issues with BNSF and with a connecting short line. BNSF west of Chicago is a mess and has been since Thanksgiving, although they are adding railroad to ease congestion. The short line does not have sufficient capacity for all the business it has. In terms of metrics, this company reports that transit times from its origin in the northeastern United States to the destination in the Pacific Northwest was averaging 17.3 days. This is in the period January 1st to April 7 last year, 17.3 days. It's averaging 26.1 days during the same period of 2014. So it went from 17 days to 26 days. Equipment is a big deal because they're not getting the turns on the cars, meaning the round trips of the loaded cars and the return for reloading takes longer. This is not entirely the fault of BNSF, although if it weren't for the paper barrier, we could use Union Pacific to reach that short line. Third report, we've been having considerable difficulty with BNSF recently in the Midwest. One major customer has seen, as a customer of this chemical company, one major customer has seen mean transit time from its plant in the southeast increase from 12 days to 19 days. That's measured since last December, the increase. Meaning the company person, spent the weekend bird dogging a car to a customer in the Midwest that we shipped out of another plant in the south on March 20th. In the scheme of things, says this company, BNSF is not a major carrier for our company, but has been a major headache. Fourth company reports, BNSF handles all of our volume out of a location in Texas. Fortunately, we have had very few service issues with BNSF. The majority of our service issues are with CSX. The fifth comment on BNSF is that BNSF is causing this company significant impacts in the Chicago area. They've had congestion issues since the October-November timeframe and continue to fail to deliver empty cars that our company owns so we can load them for customer shipment. And they continue to delay the outbound customer shipments when we are finally able to ship. This is primarily driven by one of the BNSF yards in Illinois. The final comment on BNSF is as follows. For inbound chemical shipments to our facility, so here the ACC member is the receiver, the consignee, to our facility in the Pacific Northwest, we've experienced a significant increase in BNSF transit time starting in the fall of 2013. BNSF originates this traffic in the Midwest, and the transit time on this route, in the Midwest, and the transit time on this route to the Pacific Northwest increased over 100% at peak versus the historical average. This increased transit time can be attributed to a 100% increase in the dwell time at one BNSF yard, and based on BNSF network congestion due to lack of rail capacity. In 2014, BNSF has responded that their network has not been able to keep up with the substantial crude oil volume increase, and has also told this company that a compressed agricultural harvest is part of the reason. In addition, BNSF indicated their service was further impacted by the winter season in 2014. Since this company's facility is served only by BNSF, the service impact on our chemical facility has been substantial, resulting in a 15% reduction in our plant capacity with millions of dollars in lost revenue. We turn to the Canadian Pacific comments. I have reports for you from four of our members. First member says we have not had any significant issues with the BN, but have experienced many delays with the CP, with cars heading to different points in Canada. Many cars heading from the Chicago area to Canada have experienced major delays due to the extreme weather we have faced this winter. They are still going through some major congestion issues on CP, and it's a major task to get CP to respond to our pleas for help. Second comment as follows. A very small percentage of our volume moves to CP destinations, says this company. Given all the winter weather issues, we did see delays in moving cars through the Chicago area. However, it was not a significant issue for this company. Third company said, that it's primarily serviced by CP at a captive plant location, and CP has been consistently improving their service since the meetings were held with them back in August. They have been very responsive to our needs, and they have actually been instrumental in pulling us out of crisis caused by other railroads experiencing congestion, parentheses, CSXT, end of that one. Fourth comment from a member about CP service consists of a number of bullet points. Lack of power resulting in last-minute changes to planned service potentially costs one of our business units more than $30,000 per day. Lack of response from CP's operations department regarding status or reasoning of why cars are not moving. Weather is constantly used as an excuse as this company, even for lanes that have nothing to do with Chicago. For instance, from Calgary to Vancouver. Next point made by that company is that multiple plant shutdown forms were sent in for their own company and for customer companies because of the cars not moving. Now, all I know is that they had to send in the forms. I don't know about shutdowns. Another comment from this company is that they've gotten no response from the customer service 1-800 number for CP. They've sensed an ambiguity around the operational responsibility of CP as between the yards and the asset group, and ambiguity around demurrage charges. Deceiving tariff language. For private cars, the demurrage clock will begin the day following constructive placement. This does not mean 24 hours after constructively placed, as we were led to believe. It means the day after. So if a car is placed at 11:58 p.m. on April 7, demurrage starts 3 minutes later on April 8th. So I will now turn to the other railroads. In the course of surveying the members ahead of this hearing, some carriers other than BNSF and CP were mentioned to me. As you've heard, CSX was mentioned twice in the comments above. But keep in mind also the importance of the interconnections in the rail system. Difficulties on one railroad can spread to and can affect service on other railroads as well. An ACC member would also like you to know about what it describes as, quote, significant cost issues, customer shutdowns and routing on shipments at UP interchanges in the upper Midwest with both Canadian Pacific and Canadian National. The details for that observation are that the 2014 winter weather has resulted in a bottleneck on UP, that UP has not provided adequate resources, meaning people and equipment, to adequately clear the traffic backlog. The dwell time remains an ongoing issue, and the dwell time is 4 to 5 times the normal time. And the UP's service issues in the upper Midwest have increased the company's cost base based upon the need to ship by high-cost special trains to avoid plant shutdowns, the addition of new rail cars due to longer transit times, the implementation of high-cost rail-to-truck transfers en route to avoid customers having to be shut down, subsidizing with truck shipments from suboptimal sourcing points to prevent customer shutdowns, and increased rates to manage traffic over new interchanges to improve transit. Year to date, this one service impact area for this one company is in excess of $1 million of additional cost. Thank you again for convening this important public hearing and for listening to the concerns of the industries that depend on rail service. I'd be glad to try to answer any questions you have at the end of the panel. And in closing, I would be remiss if I did not point out that if there were a greater level of competition between railroads in this country, it seems likely the shippers would have choices and the carriers might have additional incentives to provide reliable and consistent service. Thanks.
Good morning, and I thank you for the invitation to testify today. My name is DJ Statler. I'm Amtrak's Vice President for Operations. As you know, Amtrak is America's intercity passenger rail provider, and we operate the vast majority of the intercity passenger service in America. About 70% of our train miles are run on a host railroad, and even our New York to Boston Northeast Corridor services run over a 56-mile segment of the Metro-North Commuter Railroad. Consequently, all of us who are here today have an interest in a fluid and well-run railroad system. This matters because, in addition to Amtrak's statutory right to preference, which was established by Congress, the 2008 Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act, or PRIA, was intended to ensure a high level of host railroad performance. Section 213 of PREA empowers the Surface Transportation Board to investigate any time the on-time performance of an intercity passenger rail train falls below 80% for any 2 consecutive calendar quarters. The failure to meet that service quality standard set by Section 207 of the same Act is likewise a reason for the STB to take action. Immediately after PREA passed, there was a gratifying upturn in train performance. I brought some slides with me to display this performance. This first slide will show you how the performance has risen and fallen since 2006, when our long-distance trains turned in the worst average performance since 1973, an appalling 30% on the left-hand side. Although long-distance on-time performance dipped to 63% in fiscal year 2011, it's generally been at or above 70% on an average annual basis through the end of 2013, which had a correspondingly positive effect on Amtrak's financial performance. Last year in 2013, our financial performance was the best it had been in over 35 years. There was, however, a legal question about the metrics and standards established by PREA Section 207. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia held in July 2013 that the statutory process used to develop these metrics and standards was unconstitutional. We saw an immediate drop in on-time performance across the board that was directly attributable to train handling by the host carriers. If we go to the next slide, that'll show you minutes of delay due to freight train interference on a monthly basis for the entire Amtrak system. These delays are typically delays that are attributable not to weather or infrastructure condition, but simply to conflicting freight movements. We saw an immediate increase in freight delay right after the ruling in July of 2013. This problem is not confined to a single carrier. The next slide compares the minutes of host-responsible delay per 10,000 train miles for each of the 6 Class 1s. The delay on each has grown substantially over the same period in FY 2013. By the end of the first quarter of fiscal 14, long-distance train performance at all of our stations had fallen a total of 11.4 percentage points over the previous year. And by the end of March, the decline had grown to a total of 16.2 percentage points, bringing us to a system average of just 43.1% of trains on time year to date. Individual service averages for the most part banded between the high of 77% for our auto train to a low of 30.7% for the Lakeshore Limited. We did have an outlier on the low end of the bracket. Our Empire Builder, which everyone's heard about, arrived on time less than 20% of the time in fiscal year 2014 through the end of March. The next slide you'll see shows the different causes of delays for the Empire Builder on all of the hosts. As you can see on the far left, the freight train interference is the single largest cause by a very wide margin. The Empire Builder serves an area with very few transportation choices. Passengers depend heavily on Amtrak, but we are not currently providing them with the service they deserve. In the first quarter of 2014, nearly 100,000 Empire Builder passengers arrived late at their destinations. We've seen rates of delay, measured in terms of minutes of delay per 10,000 train miles, rise dramatically in 2014. Freight train interference rates have nearly tripled, and this indicates not only that there are more delays, but that these delays are of longer duration. In response, our ridership and our ticket revenues have fallen by 15% year over year to date. In coordination with the Bnsf to support recovery efforts, Amtrak's added an extra set of equipment to the pool used to provide the Empire Builder service, and we've temporarily added 3 hours to the schedule. While I am cautiously optimistic about our ability to jointly address the issues that the Empire Builder confronts with our host railroads, Bnsf and Canadian Pacific, I do want to close my statements by returning to the larger issue of systemic delay growth. Amtrak services nationwide are experiencing growing levels of delay on host railroads. If this is not addressed, it will translate into significant impacts to our service, to our passengers, and to our bottom line. We desperately want to avoid that, and we prefer to address and fix this system-wide problem by working with our host railroad partners. We do, however, have an obligation to provide the traveling public with the level of service mandated by the statute, and we therefore believe that the STB could significantly assist us by monitoring the statistics that we publish every month and asking the freight carriers to report periodically to this board on the handling of Amtrak trains. We believe this would help us to ensure that the public interest in a safe, efficient, and reliable intercity passenger rail service is safeguarded in the years to come. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I know mostly you want to hear what the railroads are going to say in response to you, and we all do, and they'll have their chance in just a bit. First of all, Mr. Wisnes, thank you very much for your, coming to Washington to tell us your situation. I am a farmer's daughter raised in South Dakota, or you could say I'm the unpaid help, unpaid labor at the time. Just kidding, but I know that the difficulty you face, or probably the sleepless nights you have, just wondering if you're going to have a crop each year based on weather. You sort of get to the point now you've had this great crop, you can't move it. I'm curious as to, you mentioned the local elevator is full, the elevator about 150 miles away, probably growing full. To what extent, for how long can grain stay on the ground before it rots? I mean, I know it rots fairly soon, but what risk of losing your production do you and your fellow farmers face at this point?
Thank you for the question. We had corn in a pile that we just got picked up off the ground last week. It's imperative to get it off the ground before the weather warms up. It kept well. It was very cold grain when we harvested it, so it kept well over the winter in the pile. But now it's crunch time. It had to be picked up. And fortunately, we had created enough bin room over the winter months to move that to the pile. We did not get that grain moved to an elevator. It was to the pile, or to the bin, excuse me.
The bin is on the farm, right?
Right, on farm storage. How well grain keeps in a pile is dependent upon a lot of factors. A lot of the corn, especially that was harvested last year, was very wet, came off the fields very wet, and essentially could not be piled. It's a good and a bad thing. You have a great crop, and you can't take advantage of it. So there's a lot of. Oops, my chair just dropped.
A little lever.
BN did that.
They don't need any more trouble. So anyway, to answer your question, I mean, it's a lot of variability. Once we can get grain in the bins, get it on air, get it dried, it keeps pretty well. But of course, we definitely have to move it before the next harvest.
And have you had the opportunity to talk with railroad officials, employees, to communicate with them directly? I know some of the other folks have mentioned they've had some good conversations, but I also know it's hard when you're calling from the farm. Maybe you don't even know who to call, but have you had communications, or could we help establish communications between you?
They're well aware of it.
I realize that. I just meant
Yeah,
I know that they are aware of it.
Yes, I've talked with our ombudsman in North Dakota, and also been to other meetings with BN to communicate. And then the press, the ag press has been all over the story and in our area too, so yes.
And if I could ask a question regarding some of the coal testimony. I'm curious to know, from my fairly short time on the board, I've read a lot how coal usage is down, partly because of EPA regs or fear of future regs, and I guess because of natural gas prices, it suddenly is getting popular again. But at what point were you seeking to really increase your usage of coal? Railroads, they don't switch operations quickly. So I'm just trying to understand, was this a year ago, or was it in January, February, December, when it's been so cold?
You want to go first?
Sure. Chair Elliott, Vice Chair Begeman, thanks for the question. I won't speak for the whole league, but I will speak for Minnesota Power. Our coal use is pretty stable. We're transforming our fleet over, several decades, and most of our coal use is at one station, the one I talked about, and That is a baseload power station that has run at that level for the last 10 years and will for the next 20 if we complete the retrofits on scrubbers and stuff that we're working on.
So for you, there's no surprise for you?
There's no surprise, and gas prices do not impact our burn. We're very industrial, load-driven, so that's high load factor around the year, and we don't move that plant much at all unless we have to.
And again, because it's going to be a long day, but did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, our usage of coal has gone up as gas prices go up. We're more competitive. Our cities are more competitive in the market. When gas prices are down, our usage is off. Last year was up 18%, and this year it's probably going to be up over 30%.
And then if I could just ask a quick question on the Amtrak charts. You know, one of the charts talked about host responsible delay, I think. Is that according to Amtrak, or is it agreed between the host railroad? And I know that folks between the railroads and Amtrak sort of do different reporting. I'm just curious, is this delay your view, or is it the consensus view in the weekly, monthly reporting that?
So I would say thank you for that. I would say that it's Amtrak data that comes from the conductors that are on the train. So when a train is delayed, they determine whether it was from excess baggage movement or passenger delay, or if there's a freight train in front of them. We currently have a paper-based system which is probably state-of-the-art for the 1980s, and we're working to improve that. That goes to the different dispatchers at the different host railroads, and if they have differences in data, we reconcile that. So for the most part, Amtrak and the host agree on that data. I think you'll probably hear, if you ask the host, some have a much higher confidence in the data than others. Over the course of this summer, we're implementing an electronic delay reporting system that will make that process more seamless, and I think the data will be more joint data than Amtrak data at that point.
Just a couple broad questions, mainly for the panel. I mean, you've mentioned communications. Are any of you, I guess, reaching a point where I know you're frustrated, but are you frustrated by communications? Like, are there no communications going on, or do you feel like at least your side of the story is being heard? You may not be ecstatic about the result, but I'm just wondering if at least there's some conversation going on.
Thanks for the question. I think we're having good communication. The problem is, what we hear is, trust us, we're not going to let you run out of coal. And we just are not confident that that's going to happen.
Anybody else with specific problems? I'm more interested in hearing if there is a communication issue, because that is something that we can immediately resolve, if there are any.
Yeah, I have no problems with the communications level. Mm-hmm. It's the ombudsman in North Dakota has been excellent in communicating in any way that's necessary. As well, we've been invited to numerous meetings with Bnsf particularly. It's not a communications problem, I don't believe. It's a performance problem.
My information is secondhand, not firsthand, and I think it kind of ranged from, I know some of the companies have gotten a lot of attention from the carriers in these situations. Others have expressed, as I read, frustration with not even being able to get customer service to give them some feedback. So there's some range there. I don't think it's consistent. And I'm not getting to the result. I'm just talking about the communications aspect, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. As far as, I guess this is probably more towards coal and the chemical shippers. I don't know if this, but please jump in if it's applicable to you. But do you see any other opportunities out there as far as service is concerned where another railroad that's not having as significant of congestion issues could help out, either taking the traffic or allowing the other carrier to run over their tracks. I mean, we do have some resources here at the board that we're able to provide for shippers in certain situations, and obviously it would make it easier if the railroads would cooperate with those requests. But do you see any of those opportunities out there, or is any of that taking place as we speak?
We sent a letter to Bnsf on March 11th asking questions about letting us use UP or to lease cars, and we have not received a written response yet. They, like I said, I don't want to keep droning on, but they keep saying, don't worry, we're not going to let you run out of coal.
And that's specifically with respect to Tempa? Or is it?
Texas. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Texas, yeah, TMPA.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's our
Okay.
short way of
Yeah, okay.
referring
Never
to
heard
it.
it called Tempa.
Yeah. It's not Tampa. Okay, no, that's helpful. I just want to urge everyone also, I know this has been mentioned in my open remarks, but we do have a very good rail customer and public assistance program. And when you do run into situations where there may be a possibility of bringing the two of you together and possibly needing a mediator where you're running into a roadblock, I do urge you to use that resource if need be.
And I have been talking to them.
Great.
Our members are well aware of the service. I know some of them have made use of that service. Back to the question about alternative ways of moving rail traffic, in the comments that I had summarized for you here today, I think they range from a specific mention of a captive plant, which would make it probably pretty difficult to get an alternative service. You'd need some kind of directed service order to get in there, all the way to the other end of the line where one of the companies mentioned that the destination point was served by, I think it was the destination point, was served by a short line, and they can't use the other Class 1 road to get to the short line because there's a paper barrier, or there are other words for paper barriers, as we know, but there's a paper barrier. So VN's got the traffic, even though the other railroad could interchange with the short line and get to the customer. So I guess it covers as often does. It covers the whole range of possibilities.
Sure.
Chair Elliott,
Yes.
with both your questions specific to Minnesota Power, I referenced this in my testimony, but it's significant enough to say it again. Communication's been superb with BNSF. They've put their top decision makers on the spot with us when we've needed to. Performance, as you've heard, isn't there, but communication's excellent. Your second question, and now I'll answer on behalf of the league. Alternatives are always good, and they're very, very hard to exercise as currently out there. But if those opportunities were there for switching, I know a lot of the league members would look for opportunities to do that, especially when times are dire like they are here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wisness, is there, I think you mainly referred to BNSF in your comments, is that correct?
Well, they are the primary carrier in our area, so
Okay,
yes, that's. But the delays are coming from basically all of the other lines too.
Okay.
BNSF, however, is the dominant one.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I knew what railroad you were referring to in your comments.
I could mention the others as well. I mean, it's kind of equal footing as far as I'm concerned. As I mentioned in my comments, we have a lot of times when we have to make these extended hauls of grain, we will go to a elevator off on another line because they happen to have had a train that has run, and so I mean we use all of the rail lines, and basically we have to deliver wherever there's an opening. But it's not limited to just BNSF.
And last question for the shipper group. As far as, I know somebody mentioned a very quick demurrage charge resulting. Have any of the others shippers here, I suppose more applicable to the grain shippers, suffered consequences as a result of the deterioration in service penalties to your customers or whoever you're shipping to as a result of this?
I would have to defer that answer to somebody more in tune with. I'm not aware of the.
Okay.
Of
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you.
And just to Amtrak, shippers can rest for a little while. And I did see this last chart with respect to performance, and I don't think I've seen it exactly put this way, and thank you for that. And it did cause some alarm based on the date of the decision versus the downturn in the metrics. I also noted that some of it also coincides with the service crisis or service issues that we're having at the present time. Do you see that as a combination of factors, or do you correlate it just with one or the other?
No, I think if you're looking at the last chart, as part of the performance degradation over the December to February has got to be weather. I mean, weather issues on our side, weather issues on the freight side. So not all of it is freight train interference, but a big portion of it is.
Sure.
It'll be good for us to watch as it's 71 in Minot, how that goes up, because we have it code by code, what's freight train interference and what is weather. We're hopeful that we're able to minimize the delays as we move forward.
So I take it you're hoping to see that as the weather improves, that line to go back upwards would be the hope.
Yes, that's the hope. But if you look at the other chart, the one before,
yes,
you can see that on the far left, freight train interference is really
significant number. And are you content? I mean, you mentioned the statutory preference requirement. Are you content that is being met as this number has gone down, or do you relate that large number that you just pointed to on the second to last chart with respect to not abiding by the preference requirement?
I would say it's the latter. I would say that not abiding by preference.
Thank you.
Is the cause for the delay.
Can I ask just one last question of Mr. Wisnes? Where is your grain going? Is it going west to the ports, or is it? I've heard from many that the Chicago area is a significant cause for all of this. And so if you're going east, we're not moving your grain. And I'm just curious, where's your grain going, if it goes anywhere?
Well, from my area in western part of the state, virtually everything goes west. Now, there was a significant increase, I think that Burlington Northern has documented, of soybean shipments that went out to the west coast over the winter. So that was a demand feature that they experienced. But generally, the western half, at least, of North Dakota grain moves west. Virtually all of the wheat moves west, and the corn and soybeans tends to move either south or east. And certainly, if someone has a better handle on that, I'd encourage them to speak on it later. But from my point of view, that's how it appears.
Okay. I think first of all, thank you very much for appearing today. It's been very helpful, and thank you for making the trip here. And I know it's not been easy with the cherry blossoms going. At least you didn't have to drive through it this morning. So you are now excused, and we'll bring up the next panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Raise this up. I must have hit the button.
Too much rain on the ground. We had not enough coal on the ground. We almost did you on the ground.
We'd also like the Secretary of Agriculture to come up with the next panel, and why don't you sit down at this end? We have a... Yeah, I think so. We'll have him lead off.
Someone else could. You want copies of our presentation?
Yeah, what we'd like you to do is provide 2 copies of any type of PowerPoint. You didn't use a PowerPoint, so I think you're okay. Actually, you don't need to provide it. Get it to work? Okay. Why don't we begin with the third panel, and we will have the Secretary begin the testimony.
Well, good morning. My name is Lucas Lynch. I serve as Secretary of Agriculture for South Dakota. And yesterday I had the great opportunity of finding myself in the midst of transportation delays, but they were of the aerial nature. A canceled flight, broken connection, and so I was looking for the aerial transportation board this morning upon my arrival. But no, I am very thankful to be here with you today, and it's an honor to come in front of you and on behalf of the state of South Dakota and read into record, first off, our letter from our governor, Dennis Dugard. Chairman Elliott, Vice Chairman Begeman, members of the Surface Transportation Board, thank you for your attention to the dire railroad service challenges facing farmers, grain elevators, ethanol plants, and other shippers throughout the Midwest. Agriculture is South Dakota's #1 industry, generating over $21 billion in economic activity each year. As Governor of South Dakota, I appreciate the opportunity to express my concern for the backlog of rail shipments. South Dakota's three largest grain commodities are corn, soybeans, and wheat. Our farmers grew excellent crops in 2013, producing 808 million bushels of corn, a new record, 183 million bushels of soybeans, and 77 million bushels of wheat, a total of more than 1 billion bushels of grain. Yet according to the National Ag Statistics Service, half of that production, a little over 506 million bushels, remains in storage. The lack of rail transportation for these agricultural commodities has already led to some spoilage of grain stored on the ground. Some elevators can no longer accept grain from local farmers because they have no storage capacity at their facilities. And when South Dakota farmers cannot sell their grain, entire communities dependent upon the economic activity of agriculture suffer. The shortage of rail cars is so acute that our storage facilities may not have enough space to accommodate the wheat harvest this summer and the corn and soybean harvest this fall. I have received numerous reports of grain shippers requiring thousands of rail cars to move the grain currently in storage. 3 grain elevators in central South Dakota are short a total of almost 4,000 rail cars. Other grain shippers report shortages of an additional 11,000 rail cars. And the problem extends beyond grain transportation. A number of farmer-owned ethanol plants in South Dakota have had to shut down for 3 to 4 days or longer because of the lack of rail service has caused their production to outpace their storage capacity. With more than 90% of our ethanol shipped by rail, the lack of rail service has had a considerable negative impact on this industry. Certainly the impact of severe weather and ongoing construction efforts combined with the large grain harvest has caused challenges for the rail system. With spring's arrival, however, it is imperative that reliable rail service be restored. Our railroad partners need to address the inconsistent delivery of cars. Locomotives and crews must be allocated to expedite shipping service to underserved areas, and investments in track improvements should be better coordinated to alleviate the tremendous backlog that is currently taxing the system. I appreciate the acknowledgement of this problem and the efforts underway to alleviate it. I encourage our railroad partners to employ a wide variety of solutions, from increasing hours of service for crew members to adding additional cars and locomotives to the lines, to eliminate the rail car shortage before the 2014 harvest begins. Farmers, biofuel producers, and other small businesses in South Dakota depend upon reliable rail service to operate their businesses efficiently and profitably. Prolonged disruptions to rail shipping will escalate into very real economic harm, and I stand by to assist in the collective effort to prevent this from happening. Thank you for your consideration and assistance. Sincerely, Dennis Dugard, Governor of South Dakota. As Secretary of Agriculture for South Dakota, I thank you for your willingness and leadership to have this hearing. South Dakota agriculture producers and shippers are in need of solutions. As a state, we pride ourselves in independence and pioneering spirit. However, we recognize the vital dependence we have on effective and reliable rail service. Today, it is imperative that I deliver a message respectful of our rail partners' unique and integral relationship with our state. Without their commitment, South Dakota becomes the world's warehouse for grain, literally. By location alone, South Dakota is one of the farthest points away from grain markets. Historically, this has placed our commodities at a disadvantage through high transportation costs. Rail is our only option. A few highlights on how we arrived here today. The world demand for grain commodities, combined with increased dry milling for our ethanol in the state, gave a signal to our farmers to increase production. Geographically, we are in a good position to feed the world demand for grain via rail transport. Over the past few years, grain companies recognized the fact that grain production was about to explode in South Dakota, and capital investments in grain handling facilities, mainly shuttle loaders, has created significant investment and totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. Railroads handled this increase in grain production with their current infrastructure until the increase in demands have overloaded their rail infrastructure itself. Farmers spent the capital to increase production. Grain companies have spent the capital to handle this new production, and now it is up to the railroads to spend the capital to get this production to export. Grain production in South Dakota is geographically stranded. We have two end users for corn, predominantly livestock and the ethanol grind. All excess bushels of grain raised have to be put on a train and railed out to an out-of-state end user. But in summary, meeting this demand for grain to feed the world is a three-legged stool. First leg, the farmer responded to market signals for increased production. The second leg, grain companies recognized the need to build up existing grain handling facilities to handle this new production. And the third leg, the railroad takes this production to export market. And now is the time to build up the rail infrastructure to handle this increased production. We are all partners together in the ag production, and if one leg collapses, the whole stool tips over. When America asked for energy independence, we turned to our farmers for help, and they answered. In South Dakota, with over 1 billion bushels of grain produced last year and over 1 billion gallons of ethanol created, we need our transportation partners. We understand there are a number of factors that make this a complicated issue. As Governor Dugard stated, we want to be an active partner to assist in providing solutions. And quickly, it is worth mentioning that South Dakota has shown a very real commitment to investing in rail. We have believed so strongly in the importance of rail service, especially for agriculture, that we've been willing to put our money where our mouth is. The state has invested nearly $30 million to improve the state-owned line from Mitchell to Chamberlain. So on behalf of our state's ag producers, thank you for listening and assisting in supporting a path forward to reliable and consistent rail service. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to go down?
Thank you, Chairman Elliott and Vice Chairman Begeman. My name is Milt Hancock. I'm the General Manager of Midwest Cooperatives, CHS Incorporated Company. We are a 7-location regional cooperative and serving central and western South Dakota. We are served by both the CP and the BN rail. We load up to 75 car units for the CP and 110 car units for the BN. I'm a member of the South Dakota Association of Co-ops and the South Dakota Grain and Feed Association also. Elevators served by the CP in my area seem to be getting farther behind. In January, facilities were up to 875 cars behind, February 1,500 cars, March 2,200 cars, April 2,300 cars. The oldest want date as of April 7th that I know of is January 15th. BN 26 car to 110 car units have been spotted up to 2 months late. Other concerns have been late penalties and rolling fees, contract penalties. There have been numerous reports from Central South Dakota of fees in excess of $150,000 imposed on elevators for late penalties in individual grain contracts. Cost of getting bought in on a spring wheat train can be as high as $120,000 on a 25-car unit. That'd be $1.50 a bushel. Numerous grain contracts were bought in during the months of January, February, and March, as evidenced by the high spot market prices at the end of each month, at times exceeding $5 over the Minneapolis market delivered Chicago. Late cars are also causing issues with our bird food commodity buyers. Most of our bird food, millet, and sunflowers are sold as single cars, not unit trains. Single car orders are extremely challenging as shippers are using all cars to fill unit train orders. We are up against some major service issues for spring wheat planting as well. When contracted plant food product that is to arrive on rail is late, we are forced to buy in spot trucks on the open market to serve our customers. This leaves us in a long position and vulnerable to declining market values with no way to hedge our risk. If it wasn't for the snowstorm this past week, we'd be in a position right now where we'd be completely out of fertilizer in our area. The slow thaw of the Mississippi is only going to exacerbate the situation. Barges bringing up fertilizer and moving grain down will be slowed, which will put more pressure on the rail. I can't see how the pace can quicken with the grain that needs to be moved. Producers ultimately suffer. Current customers of ours are hauling commodities to whoever gets the next train. This can mean that producers will haul up to 300 miles round trip. This creates a situation where producers cannot contract their grain, causing them extreme market risk. Example, if we use the 2,300 cars that I referenced earlier, our local producers could have conceivably lost close to $14 million just in my area. This is how I calculate the number. Average basis level on 15 protein spring wheat during the January, February, and March was $3.33 over Minneapolis market delivered Chicago. The basis today is $1.60 over delivered Chicago. The difference is $1.73 a bushel. 2,300 cars at 3,500 bushels per car calculates to 8,050,000 bushels. That times $1.73 equals 13.9 million. I'd venture to say that number would be much higher as the 2,300 cars I referenced was just at one location. Lack of rail service has forced producers to carry inventory longer, putting stress on their finances for spring needs, and as temperatures warm, there's a real threat of grain going out of condition in the farmers' bins. This is also evident with the many ground piles at South Dakota elevators. On a final note, earlier this week, CP advised U.S. shippers that they would not fill any orders if the shipper intended to build a shipment over the Chicago Gateway. They would only fill orders to alternative markets. This is being dictated regardless of the shipper's commitments or contracts, which are already several months late. In South Dakota, I would venture to guess that 80% of our wheat on any given year moves over Chicago, destined for U.S. flour mills. I want to conclude today expressing my gratitude to you, the members of the STB, and for the time to speak today. As I see it, forecasting rail demand for the ag industry in the future will be at a high premium. Ag must be seen as a priority. Rural America and the agriculture industry cannot afford to repeat this. Thank you, and I'll stand by for questions.
Thank you. Mr. Whiteside?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair Ann Begeman. I want to talk this morning about and kind of compliment what everyone else has been doing. But the real issue here is the real issue here is that we're very happy that the board has called the hearing, and we've been working very closely with your staffs, with Lucy Marvin and Tom Brugman and all of them. But I want to kind of cover a little bit about some of the issues that we've heard. The effects of the service meltdown continue to focus on the Burlington Northern and the CP, but we're starting to see it in the rest of the Big Four. It's important for the rail shippers here to be present at the hearing, but testifying in an STB hearing will be difficult for a lot of grain shippers for fear of retaliation. It isn't because of the cherry blossom festival that is the problem. Here the reality is what we deal with every day. Rail shippers must compete in their marketplace. Most rail-dependent shippers, large and small, cannot risk alienating a railroad that services their facility, no matter how bad the service might get. This board may not comprehend the reality of this market, but it's one that we live in every day. It isn't a matter of being brave. It's a matter of trying to survive in a competitive market. At times, I get the feeling that the board personnel does not take the danger of railroad retaliation as a reality. I compliment all the shippers that did show, and the breadth of shippers is impressive. Personally, we've held phone calls and phone conferences and meetings in the Northern Plains together with the STB Office of Public Assistance, Government Affairs and Compliance to assist them by providing information directly from the shippers, most of which who want to remain anonymous, about the effects of the service meltdown in their businesses. We've conducted phone surveys hosted by myself and conversations reviews with multiple groups of grain shippers from multiple states. These conversations have been coordinated with the North Dakota Grain Dealers Association and Steve Straggy, and many Montana growers, grain dealers, the Montana State Government, Montana Wheat and Barley Committee, the Montana Department of Agriculture, and the growers and grain dealers in South Dakota. Additionally, we've had interviews and interviewed a number of ARC members, and those shippers include shippers of coal, agricultural commodities, and manufactured goods. And lastly, we've been working with the STB Office of Public Assistance to clarify and provide factual predicate about the service meltdown. So what I want to do is I want to survey or summarize with verbatim quotes from many of these shippers that participated in the conferences. A continuing theme in the conferences was, how do we stay in business with these service disruptions that we're having to pay for? Two main topics: the continuing worsening and lengthening of the rail service crisis, and the Bnsf, what we call the 48-car marriage rules, and its effect on smaller non-shuttle elevators in Montana and North Dakota. The purpose of the conference calls was to educate the farmer and the shippers, including the staff at the OPAGAC and the STB. Elevators expressed that local BNSF personnel operating in oil field areas have stated that servicing grain traffic, which by the way has been moving about 100 years, is annoying. Is annoying now. Several elevators talk about the real fear of railroad retaliation if they or their company talk to regulators. Fact, many local elevators are muzzled by their parent or financing elevator companies from appearing or testifying. This doesn't mean they're not terribly interested. It doesn't mean they're not suffering. Many elevator operators are showing 60, 90 days behind on getting cars. One South Dakota shuttle elevator, as they talked about, put the number at over 2,000 cars behind last week. Oil shipments have taken away capacity and are being prioritized over grain. Quote, loads of wheat trains are just sitting there. End of quote. Some grain shippers talked about late deliveries of empty grain trains to the elevators, a slow pickup of the loaded cars from the elevators. There I go. How do I get that chair? The chair just went down. I'm getting used to it. Delay in local yards with shipments of loaded grains. Quote, loads of wheat trains are just sitting there. Quote, working more and more with durum and peas, less with wheat due to struggling of getting cars. Quote, BN does not seem to be prioritizing shipments of non-oil products. Another quote, farmers are paying for this, was a comment heard throughout the conference calls from the farm producers. Another quote, pea and lentil cars delivered the week of April 7th in northeast Montana were cars that were ordered to be delivered in January 1st. Next quote was, the shuttle train spotting seems to be easing while less than shuttle cars are falling farther and farther behind. Next quote was, we sense favoritism. The delivery of sand and gravel gets access within 9 to 15 days, but we're 30 days on grain, and now we're up to 90 days out and counting. I won't cover the basis points the other guys have, but it's the same. Less than shuttle rates have taken us out of the business of handling wheat. Quote, as shuttle cars are becoming available, the less than shuttles will not be available. Quote, increasing grain, the delays for grain, struggling in Montana, North Dakota, and Minnesota, trying to be the squeaky wheel, but not a big shipper. Thus, where we can, we're moving to truck and changing the business practices, which affects our bottom line. In most cases, we can't do that. From a specialty grain elevator, quote, markets to Europe, 3 weeks now to Chicago, missing contracts with the breeders in Europe, can't continue to operate and stay in business doing this. Quote, our plea to the STB, we need more cars. One of the major grain companies said we're backed up for months due to lack of trains falling back on the backs of the farmers. From pea and lentil shippers, quote, shipments are being delayed so much The 30-day phytosanitary certificates issued for the trip to PNW are running out before the shipments can make Portland. So they have to have them reissued. The BNSF problems seem to be self-imposed, insufficient manpower, not enough rail cars, not enough locomotives. Bakken oil shipments have increased by 3,000% since 2005 and sixfold since 2011, end of quote. In North Dakota, CP service may be, quote, worse than the BN. How long will these service delays go on? Let me change subjects. Montana lumber shippers are being told in the summer of 2013 they should expect delays for the next 3 to 5 years as BN repairs and increases capacity along the BN High Line. And the High Line is the old GN line. In August 2013, BN blamed the service on rail construction and upgrades. In September, as the service continued to escalate, BN told the STB that they did not see too many problems in handling this year's business. In October, as service delays continued to escalate, BN stated that the wheat harvest, which comes every year, by the way, was straining the system. In November, as the service issues continued to escalate, BN started to talk about service issues caused by locomotive power issues, and also publicly stating they were gearing up to move 1 million barrels a day of Bakken oil. In November and December, service continued, BN blaming greater than normal corn crop. Stated that service issues may continue until late spring. In January, as service continued to escalate, service issues, BN blamed cold weather. In March, as service issues continued to escalate, BN said that the service disruptions will continue through 2014. Analysis of export coal and domestic oil movements are outlined in the Heavy Traffic Still Ahead study, which was testified to by Montana Farmers Union, and they submitted that testimony in this proceeding. So I won't go through that. 48-car marriage rule. The BN issued a rule in August of 2013, which said that the small elevators, 4855s, must go out and find another one, and they got to go to their competitors to marry up with that shipment. The alternative is that they couldn't use the 4855 car rates anymore. This effect arbitrarily cut off the ability of small elevators to utilize 4855 car rates and requires them to coordinate with the long-time competitors to ship to the same locations at the same time. What I've done, just real quick, is done a couple, maybe this will work. Oh, there it goes. Okay. Rail rates. Rail rates are the highest they've ever been. So what I've got here is and I'm going to be filing all these comments, but this is the 55-car rate. If we look at the shuttle rates, same problem. We've got these for hundreds of stations. If we look in there's on basis. I'll just leave it there. We've also got values in talking about the rate levels all over the West. Coal companies, BN's dictating to coal companies, and you've already heard this,